The platform shimmered under soft amber lights, casting long shadows across the polished stone tiles. Clara stepped onto the platform, alone, her suitcase rolling quietly behind her. She had booked the journey on impulse just 3 days ago. Wrapped in her long navy coat and scarf, she moved toward the train's glowing windows, like a moth toward the moon. There was something magical about this train. Its gold-lettered carriages, deep blue panels, and windows that gleamed like antique mirrors. Attendants in crisp uniforms helped guests aboard, and for a moment Clara paused to watch them. The scent of warm brass and polished wood reached her as the doors opened. She stepped inside. Her compartment was quiet and elegant. A white bed made up with thick white linens, velvet curtains drawn halfway across the tall window, and a little table set with a chilled glass of Prosecco. Her name was written in delicate script on a card beside it. Clara Moreau, Carriage D, Compartment 8. She sat down slowly, letting the silence settle around her. There was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Space, just hers. No voices calling her name, no emails, no apologies. A soft knock came at the door. She turned, surprised. A man stood there, tall and relaxed, with a half-apologetic smile. Early 40s, maybe, dark hair swept back. A wool coat unbuttoned, just enough to show a navy sweater underneath. "Excuse me," he said with a hint of an accent. "British, perhaps? I think I may have taken a wrong turn. I'm supposed to be in compartment 9. But these doors all look the same." Clara hesitated, then smiled. "You're one door down. This one's mine." He chuckled. "Ah, that would explain the Prosecco not being for me then." He glanced at the glass. "Though it's a lovely welcome." She found herself smiling again. "Enjoy yours next door." "I'll try, though I can't imagine it will be as charming as this one." And then, just like that, he nodded and disappeared. The door closed gently behind him. Clara sat for a moment, watching the velvet curtains sway slightly from the draught. She picked up her glass, took a slow sip, and felt the bubbles rise and disappear on her tongue. A moment later, the train gave a soft lurch. The lights of the platform began to drift past the window, and Paris faded into the night. Out there, the world rushed by, but in here, it had all stopped. And in the next compartment, a man with kind eyes and a knowing smile had just taken off his coat and was settling into the same journey. Clara leaned back against the headboard, eyes closing. She didn't know what the next hours would bring. Clara changed into something softer. A black knitwear, a black knit sweater, loose trousers, bare feet tucked into slippers. The train swayed gently beneath her as she stood by the narrow window in her compartment, watching the night slip by in a blur of silver and ink. Something about the movement suited her. Maybe it was the rhythm, the certainty of tracks beneath her. Or maybe it was that curious moment at her door, the unexpected glimmer in a stranger's eyes. She stepped out into the corridor and followed the soft clinking of glasses and the hush of voices. The train curved slightly, and as she turned the corner, the dining car appeared like a dream. Lamplight golden and warm, small tables draped in white, and a soft piano melody floating through the air like smoke. She paused in the doorway. Only a handful of passengers remained. Most were tucked into their compartments for the night. And there he was, Julian, sitting alone near the window. A book in his hand, a glass of something dark on the table beside him. As if sensing her, he looked up. A smile curved across his lips, subtle, genuine, and just slightly amused. "There you are," he said, as if he'd been waiting. Clara hesitated. "I didn't expect to find anyone still awake." He nodded toward the empty chair opposite him. "Most people miss the best part of the night. Sit. Unless you were hoping for solitude." She slid into the seat. "Actually, I think solitude's overrated." He closed his book and set it aside. "Agreed." A waiter appeared, as if conjured from the shadows, offering a dessert menu and pouring water into crystal glasses. Clara wasn't hungry, but she let her eyes drift over the selections. Julian leaned in slightly, voice low. "They make a ridiculous pear tart. I won't let you regret it." She smiled, amused. "And you're an expert?" "Absolutely. I've had one in every city I've ever visited. It's a strange sort of personal quest." "Romantic," she teased. He tilted his head. "Depends on the pear." They shared one tart, light, buttery crust, fragrant slices, a cream faintly infused with saffron and vanilla. They shared one tart, light, buttery crust, fragrant slices, a cream faintly infused with saffron and vanilla. Julian was right. It was absurdly good. Their conversation floated easily. Books she loved, places he'd been. He claimed to be a travel writer, though his stories wandered off topic and into memory so often that she suspected there was more fiction than fact in his profession. She didn't mind. He asked about her journey, but not too much. No prodding, just enough to show he was listening. At one point, the train passed through a sleepy little town, and the lights outside flickered across his face. He looked out the window and grew quiet for a moment. "Funny, isn't it?" he said. "How we cross paths with complete strangers. Share a moment, then vanish again into the night." Clara studied him. "Are you planning to vanish?" He met her eyes. "Not just yet." They sat like that for a moment, neither speaking, until the spell was broken by the waiter clearing their plates. Julian stood. "May I walk you back?" She hesitated, then nodded. The corridor was hushed, lined with soft snoring of distant passengers. The train swayed gently as they walked, his shoulder occasionally brushing hers. At her door, she paused. "Thanks for the tart," she said softly. "Thanks for the company," he replied. And then something passed between them, quiet, invisible, but real. A feeling, a question. Clara opened her door and stepped inside, not quite ready to answer it. As the door closed behind her, she stood for a long moment in the dark, heart lightly fluttering, the rhythm of the train echoing in her chest. The train rocked gently as it wound deeper into the night. Clara had planned to sleep, but her mind stayed adrift, half in the dining car, half in the memory of Julian's voice, the way he said her name without needing to ask it first, as if he already knew it. The velvet hush of the train wrapped around her. She lay in bed for a while, watching the moonlit fields roll past the window, then finally slipped back into her slippers and opened the door. She didn't expect to see anyone else awake. But just beyond her compartment, the corridor stretched, dim and still, and two shadows stood near the end of it. At first, she thought she was imagining them. Then her eyes adjusted, and she saw him, Julian. He was speaking quietly to someone, a woman, tall and elegantly dressed in a long coat. Her hair dark and pinned up. Clara couldn't make out the words, but the tone was intense, low and urgent, not romantic, not casual. The woman reached out and touched his wrist. He pulled back slightly, not roughly, but firmly. Clara couldn't read his face from the distance, but there was tension in his posture. Then the woman turned and walked away, disappearing, around the corner toward the rear of the train. Julian stood there alone for a second longer, then exhaled and rubbed a hand through his hair. Clara stepped back, quietly, closing her door. She wasn't sure why her heart was beating so fast. She wasn't sure why it mattered. Back inside her compartment, she sat by the window, feeling the cool glass against her palm. She told herself it was none of her business. He was a stranger, a charming one, yes, but still just a stranger on a train. And yet it didn't feel like that. There had been something real in that moment between them, a current she couldn't explain. She finally lay back down, pulled the blanket over her, and closed her eyes. Dreams came slowly. In one she was walking through the train, but it was empty. The compartments were open, the windows dark, and voices echoed from far away. Julian's voice and a woman's. But when she followed the sound, it always stayed just out of reach. She woke in the early hours, just before dawn, the sky outside pale with morning. The train had stopped. She opened the curtain. A small station platform stood outside, quiet and blue in the pre-dawn light. A single figure was walking away across the tracks, too far to identify. And just before the train sagged back into motion, Clara thought she saw Julian standing at the far end of the platform, alone. His coat unbuttoned and his face turned toward the light. But when she blinked, he was gone. The first light of morning crept in like a whisper, brushing soft amber across the folds of Clara's blanket. She blinked awake slowly, unsure for a moment where she was. Then the low hum of the train and the elegant blue curtain reminded her. She sat up, still wrapped in sleep, and opened the window shade fully. Outside, the world was bathed in a soft golden haze, rolling green hills, little stone houses scattered across distant ridges, and low mist resting over the trees. Italy. She showered quickly and changed into a linen blouse and pale gray trousers. Pulling her hair into a loose knot, her thoughts flickered back to the night before, the woman, that conversation, and Julian. The dining car was brighter now, flooded with morning light that glinted off glassware and porcelain. A soft jazz tune played in the background, lazy and romantic, as if time had slowed. She spotted him at once. Julian sat near the window again, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, staring out as the countryside drifted by. His hair was slightly mussed, as though he hadn't slept much. When he saw her, something in his expression shifted. "Good morning," he said, his voice lower than usual, but warm. "You're up early." "So are you," she replied, slipping into the seat across from him. "Couldn't sleep?" He offered a very smile. "Too many dreams." Clara hesitated, then looked him in the eye. "I thought I saw you last night, in the corridor, talking to someone." Julian didn't seem surprised. He glanced down at his coffee, then back at her. "You have sharp eyes," he said softly. "Most people miss things in the dark." And there was a silence between them, not uncomfortable, but laced with a quiet tension. She looked Familiar, Clara said, trying to sound casual. Julian nodded slowly. Her name's Elena. We were involved once. Clara waited, not pushing. She wasn't supposed to be on this train, he added, almost to himself. I didn't expect to see her again. Clara studied him. Are you running from her? Julian met her gaze. His eyes were unreadable, something between regret and honesty. I'm running from a version of myself that I don't want to be anymore. And that answer settled between them like a stone in still water. A waiter appeared with a silver tray, fresh croissant, fruit, and coffee for Clara. She accepted it, grateful for something to hold on to. Julian changed the subject gently, asking about her favorite childhood vacation. They laughed about mismatched socks and forgotten passports. The mood lightened again, but the shadow of that earlier conversation lingered quietly, like smoke trailing behind a candle. As the sun climbed higher, the train passed over a wide river. The light glimmered across the water like spun glass. They both turned to look, sharing the silence. It's strange, Clara murmured, to feel so close to someone you barely know. Julian didn't speak right away. Then he said, maybe we've just known each other somewhere else. Another lifetime, another train. And Clara smiled faintly. Or maybe it's just that this one feels like a dream. He reached for his coffee, but his hand paused halfway. If it is, would you want to wake up? Clara didn't answer. Outside the window, the hills gave way to open fields and lavender skies. The journey continued. The afternoon wore on, warm and slow, as the train rolled across sun-drenched hills and sleepy Italian towns. Clara spent most of it alone, walking the corridors, letting her thoughts unwind with the rhythm of the train. She hadn't seen Julian since breakfast, though she'd thought of him more than once, remembering the quiet way he'd spoken about Elena, honest, unvarnished, as if he'd handed her something private without expecting it back. When she returned to her compartment to freshen up, a note had been slipped under her door. Dinner tonight? Table by the window, 7 o'clock. Please come. J. Clara stared at the note for a moment, then smiled softly. She changed into a soft blue dress and tied her hair up, unsure why she cared what she looked like. The dining car glowed with low lamps and polished brass, the hum of conversation buzzing just under the clatter of cutlery and glass. Julian stood when she arrived, pulling out a chair beside him. Elena was already there, dressed impeccably in a silk blouse, her dark hair coiled into a perfect chignon. She greeted Clara with a dazzling smile. There she is, the mysterious beauty from compartment 8. Clara gave a polite smile and took her seat. A fourth chair was occupied by a man Elena had roped in, a financier from Brazil who spoke little English and seemed overwhelmed by Elena's relentless charm. Wine arrived in generous pours. The first glass smoothed the edges, the second brought laughter, but by the third things began to tilt. Elena grew louder, her jokes landing with a slap instead of a sparkle. She interrupted stories, corrected Julian mid-sentence, and laughed a little too hard at nothing at all. When Julian began to describe a quiet village he'd visited in Greece, she rolled her eyes. Here we go again. One of your tragic little travel tales. Always so poetic, Elena said. Julian's expression didn't change, but Clara saw something flicker there, a strain at the corner of his eye. Maybe we should talk about something else, he said gently. Why? Scared your new friend might get the wrong idea? Elena said, her words loose now, sliding into each other. She waved her glass toward Clara. Honestly, you must be tired of hearing about the Acropolis and soul-searching and sadness. He's got this whole brooding thing down to an art. Clara said nothing. She didn't need to. The moment had turned. Julian stood up slowly. I think we're done for the evening. Come on, Elena slurred, rising too quickly, her wine spilled onto the tablecloth. Can't take a joke? Clara pushed back her chair. Her heart was racing, not out of fear, but discomfort. That terrible crawling sense of watching something unravel you're not meant to see. Julian turned to Clara. I'm sorry, you shouldn't have to. But Clara was already stepping away. It's all right. Thank you for inviting me. She left the dining car quietly. The laughter and clinking glassware fading behind her like distant music. Morning returned gently, with pale blue light sliding across the folds of Clara's curtain. The train had crossed into northern Italy. Its rhythm quieter now, the landscape wide and open. Clara rose slowly, her limbs still heavy from the night before. Not from wine, but from the weight of witnessing something raw, something that wasn't hers to carry. She dressed simply and walked to the dining car, unsure what she'd find or who. Julian was already there. He stood as she approached, the lines beneath his eyes deeper than usual, his smile a little hesitant. Good morning, he said softly. I wasn't sure if you'd come. Clara slid into the seat across from him. Of course I would. He paused, then looked down at his coffee. About last night. Julian, she interrupted gently, it's not your fault. He looked up. She's in pain. You both are, in different ways. I understand. Julian exhaled slowly, something in him easing. Still, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. Clara gave a small smile. Neither did you. They sat for a while in comfortable quiet, sipping coffee, watching the fields roll by. Later that morning, they found a table in the observation lounge, where Clara pulled a small deck of cards from her bag. I hope you're ready to lose, she said, arching an eyebrow. Julian laughed, confident. I like that. They played for hours, the conversation wandering with the rhythm of the train. They spoke of favorite books, the worst movies they'd ever seen, the cities that felt like home even if they weren't. Clara learned Julian had once taught literature, long before he became a travel writer. Julian learned Clara used to paint, though she hadn't touched a brush in years. There was no hurry, no pressure, just two people unfolding in front of each other, piece by piece. Around dinner time, Elena appeared again. She looked tired, her eyes shaded by a headache, and her movements slow. She wore a large pair of sunglasses and a scarf loosely around her shoulders, and she held herself with the cautious grace of someone trying not to crack. Mind if I sit? She asked, voice low. Clara nodded politely. Julian said nothing, but moved his glass aside so she could settle in. They spoke briefly. Elena sipped water, tried a few bites of bread. Then, after a few minutes, she stood. I'm going to lie down again, she said. Julian gave her a faint nod. All right. When she left, Clara and Julian didn't speak right away. The train rolled on through golden light, and the silence wasn't uncomfortable, just real. Julian turned to Clara after a while. I'm glad we met, he said. Clara looked at him, her expression soft. So am I. Later that night, Julian walked the quiet corridor back toward his compartment, tired but content. The hum of the train had become almost hypnotic. He reached his door, inserted the key, and nothing. He frowned, tried again. The lock clicked but didn't open. He sagged and tried knocking, lightly, just in case. but there was no response. After a moment, he gave up, running a hand through his hair and laughing quietly to himself. Of course, of all nights. With nowhere else to go, he wandered toward the bar car, where the lights were low and only one figure remained. Clara. She looked up, eyes twinkling above her wineglass. Back so soon? She teased. What happened? Couldn't stay away? Julian grinned and walked over, sitting beside her. Actually, my door's locked. I think Elena may have thrown the bolt from inside. Clara snorted into her glass. Seriously? She shook her head, amused. Well, that's a first. Julian shrugged, smiling sheepishly. Guess I'm homeless tonight. Clara sipped her wine and gave him a sideways glance. You can sleep in my compartment if you want. There's an extra single bed. It folds down from the wall. He blinked. Are you sure? Absolutely. I promise not to steal the blanket. They share another glass of wine. Softer now, the hour leaning toward silence. And when they finally rose to leave, the corridor was hushed and warm. Clara led the way to her compartment and opened the door. Inside, the lamplight glowed softly over two made beds. She pulled the curtain across the window and turned down the covers. Julian stood for a moment, quiet. Thank you, he said. The compartment was warm, with soft lamplight, the rhythm of the train steady and low like a distant heartbeat. Clara moved around quietly, folding her sweater, slipping off her shoes. Julian stood near the door, unsure whether to sit, speak, or just breathe. Clara turned her back to him, slowly, her fingers brushing the nape of her neck. Would you mind, she asked softly, the zipper? Julian blinked. Oh, sure. He stepped closer, his hand brushing the soft fabric of her dress. The zipper slid down without resistance. The sound impossibly loud in the quiet room. As the dress loosened, the neckline slipped from her shoulders. She held it for a moment, then let it slide down, pulling silently at her feet. She didn't turn around. Julian stood still, his breath shallow, the sight of her, barebacked and still, lit by the soft golden glow, tugged at something deep inside him, a longing he hadn't let himself feel in years. He stepped forward, slowly placing his hands gently on her hips, his chest pressed against her back as he wrapped his arms around her. He kissed her shoulder, then her neck, soft and reverent. Clara let out a quiet breath, goosebumps rising along her arms, her eyes closed. Then she turned. They looked at each other for a long moment, saying nothing, just breathing the same air. And then finally, she leaned up and kissed him, soft at first, then deeper, longer. Her fingers tangled in the back of his shirt. His hand found the curve of her waist. And when they finally pulled apart, Julian pressed his forehead to hers. Clara, he whispered, voice barely audible. Is this all right? She looked up at him, eyes steady. Yes, she said. Yes, it is. The train kept moving, but the rest of the world seemed to stop. Just the two of them, in the golden hush of night, finally still. He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands settling on her waist, drawing her closer. Her skin, bare against the soft cotton of his shirt, felt electric beneath his fingertips. She melted into him, her hand sliding under the fabric, tracing the curve of his back, exploring the shape of him with a hunger neither had voiced until now. He pulled her gently toward the lower bed, never breaking the kiss. She moved with him, sinking into the covers as his body followed hers, slow and reverent. The small space between them vanished entirely. Clara reached up, tugging at the hem of his shirt. He helped her, pulling it over his head in one clean motion, then leaned down to kiss her collarbone, her shoulder, the hollow of her neck. Her breath hitched, fingers threading into his hair as he moved lower, slower, tasting her skin like something he'd longed for without realizing. She gasped softly when his hand slid down her sides, over her tights, exploring every curve with aching care. He worshipped her with touch, with mouth, with whispered words against her ear that made her arc toward him. Her name on his lips sounded like something sacred. She guided him back up, pulling him to her, their eyes locking again in the flickering light. There was no performance here, no pretending, only this shared private unfolding, an offering of bodies and trust. When he entered her, they moved as one, their breaths falling into rhythm with the swaying of the train, the hush of wheels and tracks below. The world fell away completely. There was only skin, warmth, the pressure and pull of two people finding something they hadn't known they needed. Their rhythm built, slowed, surged again, never rushed, never frantic, just felt, deep and real. And when they finally stilled, wrapped around each other, the air between them was thick with heat and stillness. Julian kissed her temple, her shoulder, the top of her hand where it rested on his chest. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Outside, the countryside rolled on, beneath a sky full of stars. And inside, in that tiny golden room, two souls rested in something that felt like a beginning.